Let's go ahead and turn to this huge domestic news. We can put this up on the screen. So Joe Biden has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer. I'll read you this. Last week, President Joe Biden was seen for a new finding of a prostate nodule after experiencing increasing urinary symptoms. On Friday, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer characterized by a Gleason score of 9, grade group 5, with metastasis to the bone. While this represents a more aggressive form of the disease, the cancer appears to be hormone sensitive, which allows for effective management. The president and his family are reviewing treatment options with his physicians. You can put the next piece up on the screen. This is from Ken Klippenstein, pulled some research about the 5-year survival rate for this form of metastasized prostate cancer, which has metastasized to the bone. He says the study found a 5-year survival rate of 32%. Joe Biden also, relatively elderly at this point as well, which doesn't help for the survival rate chances. And, this comes, Emily, of course, at a time when there has been a lot of focus on who knew what and when with regard to Joe Biden's mental decline over the course of his presidency and even potentially before his presidency, something we've certainly been talking about since before his presidency. So a lot of questions raised about the timing of this announcement, given the advanced state of the cancer. So to address all of these things and tell us what he saw when he was deep inside of Biden world, we're going to be joined by Michael LaRosa. He is the former press secretary to Dr. Jill Biden, and he's been speaking out about some of what he saw while he was on the inside. Joining us now in studio is Michael LaRosa, former press secretary for Dr. Jill Biden. Good to see you, Michael.
Good to see you, too. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, of course. So before we jump into all of this, including the cancer diagnosis and, the mental decline and what people knew at the time, just lay out for our audience, what was your role? How close were you with the Bidens? How often did you see the former president? Those sorts of things, so we sort of have a baseline.
Sure. So, I was actually considered more of an outsider, and the Bidens did not take many outsiders into their bubble, their traveling bubble on the 2020 campaign. So I started with them as Dr. Biden's traveling press secretary, starting in 2019. So I traveled everywhere with her throughout the Democratic primary, stayed with her through the general election in the same position, and then went to the White House as her chief spokesperson, special assistant to President Biden, and also primary traveling spokesperson for the First Lady. So we traveled to about 18 countries, 38 states, and 75 cities in that first 2 years of the White House when I was there. Spent a lot of, because our, what they call the traveling bubble was very small and
that's COVID era too, so probably particularly
COVID era. Yes, it was like that prior to COVID. There was his traveling bubble, our traveling bubble, and then we all kind of, and during COVID, we would end up staying close physically together, living together in Wilmington, because we tried to keep the Bidens around the same people consistently, and a smaller group as well. But that smaller group was really the group that spent the most time with both Bidens, whether it was in Wilmington, Rehoboth, or Camp David. They left the White House most weeks.
So what was your reaction to the news yesterday of Joe Biden's cancer diagnosis?
It was, human, right? Sad, heartbreaking. Trying to learn more about how bad it is and, how long the treatments can get him. Obviously, he's 82, so things when you're diagnosed, I guess, I'm not a doctor, but I imagine that when you get diagnosed with a cancer like that metastasizes to bones, that it's not good. But just praying, I've been thinking a lot about Dr. Biden, and I saw the picture that they posted this morning with Willow, their cat, who I have a special relationship with because I watched her for the first year of the White House. So it made me, it choked me up a little bit to see the three of them. But I'm just thinking a lot about them today.
So this has raised a lot of questions for people about, this comes in the context of questions about the cover-up of his decline.
That's right.
This is unfortunately a very aggressive and advanced stage of disease, apparently. And so we can put B3 up on the screen. You know, it's a lot of people on the right who are saying, is this really when they got the diagnosis, or is this actually time to come out now? But this is someone, a doctor from Yale.
Is a
who
Yale professor.
was also raising questions. It's inconceivable that this was not being followed before he left the presidency. Gleason grade 9 would have had an elevated PSA level. That's like something that would show up in a blood test, I'm understanding, for some time before this diagnosis. He must have had a PSA test numerous times before. This is odd. I wish him well, and I hope he has an opportunity for maximizing his quality of life. You know, given what you saw of the way that the Bidens operated, can you assure people that this diagnosis was just made now and that there wasn't some longer-term cover-up of an earlier cancer diagnosis?
No, I can't assure you that. I saw Zeke Emanuel on Morning Joe for the first 20 minutes of Morning Joe basically say the same exact thing. University of Penn doctor. I believe he's an oncologist. I'll have to go back and check. I thought he was. Now again, I'm just repeating what I observed and heard this morning, which is that it would be very unusual, according to Zeke Emanuel, who was on this morning, that Gleason level 9 would not have been found much earlier. He said that generally, you know, he may have not have had these PSA tests after 70 years old. However, the 3 other presidents, I believe it was Obama, Bush, and Trump, who did have these PSA tests when they were in the White House, according to their medical results, but Biden did not. So, look, there's questions, and I understand why there's questions. And I think it was BBC journalist Katty Kay, who was on today, who's also said on this topic, you know, given the conversation we are having about trust right now, this does raise questions. And they're saying that. I am just observing and listening and hearing, but it's.
But given your experience with them and the way that they operated, you're effectively saying you wouldn't put it past them to have hit a cancer diagnosis for some amount of time.
I've always wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, and my experience when I was there was it was hard. It was very hard. Their natural instincts, and I'm not talking about Joe and Jill Biden. Okay, I want to be clear. I'm talking about the people that they listened to, the people in that inner circle, in that insular
You're talking
bubble.
about Donilyn, Rashedi, sister.
More about the people who were safeguarding their privacy constantly, which sometimes took the sort of North Star to political decisions.
So it sounds like there's an inner circle which you were a part of, and then an inner circle within that inner circle. And I think that's something that Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson are reporting in Original Sin is that. But I also wonder to what extent that's a kind of cope, and I want to get your thoughts on that. That it gives some people the ability to sort of say, well, we were, you know, there was this privacy circle that was being like they were circling the wagons around what may have actually been happening. What's your take on that? I mean, is it real that maybe it was Joe Biden, Jill Biden, and Hunter Biden, Valerie? Like, what is that? Like, who would have been keeping it so that even people like yourself weren't thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is out of control," unless you were thinking that?
It's hard to say. It's a matter of timing. Like, what period are you particularly referring to? Like at the end?
Because that's what the book suggests, that it happens after 2022, the Hunter stuff. To me, that's hard to believe.
And I left right after 2022.
So did you see? And
I've always been consistent. By the way, I should preface this by saying, no, he never ever gave me a moment's pause. I went on Fox News, Jesse Waters, the night of the debate to say, look, he's going to run circles around anybody on his record, on policy, on the other guy's record. My concern was the performative aspect of debating and showmanship. Did he prepare with a studio light? Did he prepare was he prepared for the unexpected against Donald Trump? That's why it's not like debating a different or a traditional kind of Republican. So was he prepared for that kind of thing? And remember, we were always used to him showing up on game day, especially like we beat Trump in the last 2 debates. He showed up at the State of the Union. And if you think about it from that inner circle's mind with everything, going back to 1987, which it was the most and first scarring experience in politics that they had, Joe Biden to them and the way they think and the way they make decisions is that Joe Biden is underestimated. Joe Biden always defies gravity in the face of people who doubt him. So you have to keep that in mind, that that's how they make very big decisions.
So one of the big pieces of information we just got is her audio was just released. And we've got a couple of moments here. The first one is with regard to the central question with regard to that was these classified documents. And he appears sort of confused about, exactly what they were, why they were there, et cetera. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
Were you aware that you had kept it after your term as vice president? Did you know that you had it?
I don't know that I knew, but it wasn't something I would have stopped to think about.
The reason I ask is it's been written about. Bob Woodward wrote about it in one of his books. Jules Whitcover wrote about it in his biography of you. So that's the reason I asked, is if it was something that you wanted to hang on to because it was going to be the subject of reporting or history.
I don't want it to be subject of reporting, but I wanted to hang. I guess I wanted to hang on to it just for posterity's sake. I mean, this was my position on Afghanistan.
Mr. President, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm sorry. Anyway, that's what I wanted to do.
I
It had
really,
nothing to do with Afghanistan.
Okay, that answered my question.
And Mark, just really quickly, I promise it'll be brief. I just really would like to avoid, for the purpose of a clean record, getting into speculative areas. When the president responded and said, I don't recall intending to keep this memo, you then said, well, might you have thought it was important to keep whatever? And he said, well, I guess I could have. His recollection, as I understand it, is he does not recall specifically intending to keep this memo after he left the vice presidency. And I want these questions to be as clearly answered and recorded on the transcript as possible.
I think we should take a break at this point.
And probably even more significant was the audio that was released regarding his confusion of when his son, Beau, passed away, and also when he was in the vice presidency and being confused about the years when he was serving in which office. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
I don't know. This is what, 2017, 18, that area?
Yes, sir.
Remember, in this time frame, my son is either been deployed or is dying. What month did Beau die? May 30th.
2015.
Was it 2015 he died?
Maybe 2015.
I think it's 2015.
I'm not sure the months are, but I think that was
Yeah.
That's right, Mr. President.
And what's happened in the meantime is that Trump gets elected in November of 2017? 2016. All right. So, why do I have 2017 here?
That's when you left office.
And
So
so,
I'm wondering if it's a good time to take a break briefly. Then.
no, let me just keep going to get it done.
Was this your experience of President Biden at this time?
And that's 2023.
Yeah, and I wasn't there then, but part of that, a couple things, just observing and listening, hearing how he's responding to answers that are put to him, or questions that are put to him in a context that is in private. Slowly, yes. Oftentimes that could be representative. That was accurate of what I saw. That it was slowly processing, or that you could ask him a question, he'd think about it for a little bit and then answer. So, but I don't know if that is a reflective of decline or not, because I only knew him as an older man, right? I met him in 19. And so that was consistent from what I knew. So it's hard for me to say that was was he messing up dates? Sure. Yeah, he was. But I don't know how much that is mental decline and age. I just don't know.
What's interesting from the Tapper Thompson book excerpts is that it seems from maybe the donor perspective and the insider perspective, it became sort of the scuttlebutt that people were a bit concerned after what 2022 is roughly where they draw the line. Was that your experience that people started to privately talk about it?
Oh, yes. Yes, that was. In June of 2022, we started to do some fundraising, prospecting, start to sort of build out what would be the sort of mechanism or operation for a potential super PAC for the reelect. And when we were going around and meeting with donors around the country, I mean, there were donors who came up to the First Lady and thanked her for all of the saving democracy, restoring institutions. But part of his legacy can also be passing the torch and turning it over to an open democratic process that can be part of his democracy legacy. So no, they were hearing from people who were, and that particular donor, the one that I recall, specifically asked her not to do this, that her family has sacrificed enough. Please don't do this.
Wow.
And it was in a very large room with a lot of people. It was not open to the press, but there was a senior aide to the First Lady who then went back and said, would that answer be different if you knew he was running against Trump? Because I think the mindset in Biden world was that Biden can do this. If it's going to be Trump, he's the only one that beats Trump. That was the argument, that he was the only one who had beaten Trump. And so that donor immediately said, of course not. I don't want either of them to be 78 or older and running for president. He said, I don't want my doctor, my surgeon, or my pilot to be 82 either. So no, they were hearing this, but all of that, if you understand the Bidens and their mindset, again, if you go back to and understand what happened in 87 when they were pushed out very publicly and in a humiliating way, it was not, they were only going to double down ever if they read op-eds or if they saw people on the news or people like that who were recommending that he shouldn't and can't, because in their experience and what we experienced during the primary and the first couple of years of the White House, it was basically Joe has defied gravity. Joe always beats expectations, and there's always the doubting class.
How do you reconcile that the public was able to have a better understanding of where he was in his decline than someone who was on the inside, such as yourself?
Well, I mean, and even when I, on the outside, was always, I always knew they were running for re-election. That was always the plan since the transition.
So the talk about building a bridge to the next generation, I mean, he did sort of, he did all but say
correct
it was going to be one term.
Yeah, well, yeah, and he implied,
and he never intended that.
And he implied that he was a bridge to the next generation, right?
Right.
He didn't say when that bridge would be. It was when he was finished. And but no, I was never under. It was. Let's just put it this way. It was made very clear to me when I raised the issue behind closed doors. Something like, I think I said, oh, well, we're not actually running for re-election, so what does it matter? And somebody, immediately, dropped the hammer on me and said, why wouldn't he be running? Of course we're running for re-election. This is a second term thing we're going to do. This is an after the re-elect. The culture and the tone was always that he was running for re-election. And our response publicly was nobody runs for 4 terms or for 4 years. It's always you run for president for 8 years.
And there's a lot of speculation, and especially people on the right look at Dr. Joe Biden, and I'm sure you've heard this, and say that's
Edith Wilson.
Yeah, it's cruel that she was propping up her husband, and there was a briefing late in his term that I think she took the helm of, and people were saying that it was some type of big power grab.
Yeah, we have to separate reality from rhetoric. What was she propping him up? No, but was she certainly undeterred and driven, as driven to defy the doubters? Of course she was, because she believed in him. But she had her own life. She had her own career. She continued her own career. She can't stand politics. If he did not want to be president again or to continue being president, she'd be the first person in her convertible headed to the beach and would never have a reason to come back to Washington because she didn't really use her platform. And, we used to fight about this all the time, but like, she didn't have her own agenda there. She didn't use her office to sort of pursue a policy agenda or whip votes the way many first ladies have done for their initiatives. She did not do that. She didn't want to do that. Our office was essentially a continued version of the campaign. It was a permanent campaign surrogate operation, which means that we were integrated with the West Wing as for better or for worse, we were very integrated in the West Wing, and she always had a seat at the table because our representatives were there, but because we considered ourselves and they considered us a partner in going out and selling to the American people his vision, his goals, his agenda, the American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure,
CHIPS Act.
Well, CHIPS Act, but we were kind of leading the effort for vaccinations all over the country at that time, and for the first year generally. So I considered it what you would call sort of an event-driven operation that was very coordinated and very integrated into the West Wing.
Let me get your response to Beto O'Rourke had some very strong comments with the Pod Save guys recently that I want to get your reaction to. Let's go ahead and take a listen. This is B7, guys. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
Just to be clear, Biden should not have run again. And to be even more clear, he failed this country in the most important job that he had. In fact, the entire rationale for his presidency the first time and the rationale he tried to sell us on for his attempt to run for re-election. Only I can stop Donald Trump. And he failed to do that. And it's not just you and me, but our kids and grandkids and the generations that follow that might have to pay the price for this. We might very well lose, the greatest country that this world has ever known. And it might be in part because of the decision that Biden and those around him made to run for re-election instead of having an open primary where the greatest talent that the Democratic Party can muster could be on that stage to have a competition of ideas and track record and vision. I think that credibility problem is going to persist up until when Democrats say we fucked up and we made a terrible mistake.
So he says he failed this country. I think the current president is a fascist. I think I'll leave Emily out of this. But I suspect that you agree with that assessment. I mean, do you think that
I don't, but go ahead.
You think Beto's right?
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything Beto said. Look, I said to the New York Times, Peter Baker, in an article in February 2024 when Biden was still in, that this is a gamble that they are taking because they believe that only they can do this, and that his legacy, and this was more of an article about, I think his legacy or was, the pressures that they were facing. And yeah, damn right there's pressure because his legacy, and I assumed they knew this in February of 2024 when I gave this quote, but that his legacy was going to be defined on whether he wins or loses to Donald Trump. And that running was taking a gamble on that entire legacy of 50 years in public life was going to be overshadowed. And I think you're seeing that. We're not talking about Joe Biden and the CHIPS Act or the American Rescue Plan or bringing this country back from the brink or the Violence Against Women Act that he was way ahead of his time on. We're not talking about those things. And so for the short term, it's going to be very unpleasant for the family to sort of reconcile the legacy that historians and the news media and Democrats are going to be writing in the short term because of the decisions that they made.
Do you have any personal regrets about how you handled or you didn't speak up?
No, because I was speaking up after I left. At least throughout 2023, I wrote it. And the way I spoke up was he needs to be his own advocate. When I saw the disengagement, when I saw that they were giving up opportunities like Kristen Welker's first Sunday show, Meet the Press, I tweeted, all right, we can't, if we're going to lose the news cycle, we can't complain that they cover Trump for the entire weekend and all the news he makes because we are turning it down. Or the Super Bowl interview, or not doing press conferences and press avails.
But did you think that was because he couldn't do it, because he wasn't up to it? Or
I didn't know, and
you thought it was just a bad strategy?
Actually, I thought it was a bad strategy. I didn't know, and I didn't care because I knew for 3 years by that point we were running no matter what. And in history, as a student of history, I know, like, okay, like I even said out loud that it was a mistake to mess around with the primary calendar because it looks like we're scared.
Yeah.
It looks like we have something to hide. And we don't need to mess with the primary calendar. It does him a disservice. All of these things I was saying, I'm from ground zero of the swing district in a swing state in Pennsylvania 7 that we lost. And it was the one of 2 counties that flipped from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. Reaganomics is what killed Bethlehem Steel. At least that's what the people of Allentown and Bethlehem believe. So to wrap your economy in Bidenomics and take credit, wrap your name around inflation in an unsettled economy. I wrote this in an op-ed, and they hated it. They were furious that I was trying to at least say you have to show, not tell. You can't be a candidate and run for president and try to run out the clock. It's just not going to work. It's not going to work, especially against a candidate like Donald Trump who embraces the media, who is confident enough to go anywhere and talk to anyone. And they attacked me, they smeared me, they planted stories about me. They were terrible to me. It paid a personal price for speaking out. Did I speak out about his age? No, I did not speak about his age because, again, my experience was that I never had that issue with him. My issue was what they clearly decided was a choice not to engage with voters, not to engage with the media, and the public in the way that you do when you run for re-election. And I was seeing the same polls you're talking about. None of those polls changed.
Right.
The polls in 2022 and 2023 were saying at least 3/4 of our voters did not want him to run again.
Right.
People and Democrats were speaking through the polls. I saw that, I said that, and I would say things that would make them very angry, like, we loved polls 4 years ago, because when we were running for an entire year, about 200, I went and looked it up, 251 out of 256 public polls had us ahead, and we loved polls then. So I really hate it that my old teammates were denying polls, denying data, denying the journalism out there, denying the inflation numbers. It made me angry because you're supposed to at least try to see your flaws and your vulnerabilities in real life for what they are, and then try to confront them and change them. And they wouldn't do any of that. It was undermining the media, trashing the Times, trashing the Journal. And I didn't get it. They ran scared. Well, these were the things I had a problem with, and these were the things that ultimately cost me a lot of close friendships and probably my relationship with them. But the other thing that they didn't like, that I'll go ahead and say to you guys, is they didn't like I was joining the effort to help their son. The Bidens loved it. I was the only public advocate for their son because I hated the idea of children being weaponized or families of politicians being weaponized. And I saw what it did to the Bidens in real life, 19 and 20, and through the White House. And the people in that White House who called me disloyal were throwing their son under the bus constantly. Nobody was using the bully pulpit to fight back against Comer and Jim Jordan. They weren't doing anything. They weren't fighting back to help Hunter. I was out there, but the White House did not want they wanted distance from Hunter, which is why, Hunter fired Anita Dunn's husband and brought in his own knife fighter, Abby Lowell. And they didn't like that. They didn't like that we were being aggressive in defending their son, in defending Hunter, and trying to set up a legal defense fund for him, which, by the way, George Bush 41's donors did for his son, who cost the American people a lot more money than Hunter Biden.
My last question is on family. It's, I look at Joe Biden, I wonder if he was in a place where he could be trusted to make the decision about whether he can run again. If he was sort of had his faculties about him in order to say, I'm running for re-election, who was telling him, or was it him? From your understanding, is that he wanted to run again? And so, as you said, Jill Biden was all in as long as, but was he in a position to competently say, I want to run again, and then have the people who love him say, oh yes, this is a good idea? Or should people have stepped in and said, well, you're not well.
I don't want to dodge your questions, but you're correct that he did think that. Again, I do not know whether again, there's a difference between covering up age and mental decline, and I have no idea behind the scenes whether there's a cognitive issue. What I will say
But
is,
we did see it in front of the scene in the debate. We ended up seeing,
but what we saw, we don't know because none of us are medical doctors, right? So we can't say, what we can say is something was wrong, something was not right. Going back to the point where if you can't perform as a candidate, you can't be running.
Yeah.
Because you can be president, but there's a difference between running for president and running the country.
So who do you blame?
So here's the thing. They were one of the smartest strategists in Democratic politics. I'm talking about a pollster who has a lot of Democratic candidates as clients, governors, senators. John Anzalone was our chief pollster in 2020 and 2019, a Biden guy. Since 1987. He was iced out after 2022 because he—
By who?
The team.
Who's the team?
It's Anita Dunn, Mike Donnellan. I don't know about the others.
Dr. Biden?
I don't know. She would not make a decision like that, but the other ones would be the ones to say, all right, he cannot be showing the president this data. Because John was actually sending us monthly data and polling updates in the first year on where the party was, where the country was, the mood of the country on inflation, things like that, before the Virginia gubernatorial. And in 2022, they just iced him out. John was never even told he was going to be not with us in 2024. The other person—
They didn't like the numbers.
They didn't like
so
the numbers.
they iced
And
him out.
Steve Shale, another one who ran President Obama's state operation in Florida, not once, but twice, ran the draft Biden movement in 2015, was going to be the lead strategist for the 2016 campaign. Had he run, Steve Shale ran our super PAC in 2020 or 2019, 2020, raised us millions of dollars. He was doing analysis and he was doing surveys and polling. He gave in June of 2022, he also provided the Voss data that wasn't looking good about 2024 and what we needed to do to fix that. And at that point, he was iced out.
Wow.
Never even invited to the White House in 4 years.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming by, sharing your experience.
Sorry
what you saw.
for the over talking.
No.
We,
There's a lot to talk about in this, and there's a lot of different facets. I love them. I love Joe and Jill Biden, and I love the family, but I do think they were done a disservice by the people around them, and I hope they can start making adjustments to some of the advice that they've been getting.
All right, Michael LaRosa, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.